This report is just 40 pages.
Yeah.
And it documents the whole build-up, for someone who's coming in late to the India-Pakistan military rivalry.
I was honestly very surprised to read this report and get a feeling that, the Pakistani Air Force does not seem to be so bad after all in terms of capabilities.
PLAF is a newbie when it comes to air combat, right? It's barely seen any action. There have been some skirmishes in the 50s, of course, over Korea, 60s and 70s, but modern day combat using 4th generation and 4th generation plus fighter jets, the PLAF is not as conversant with it as, say, the Pakistan Air Force.
At some point, India had around 86 aircraft in the air. At some point, I'm not sure if all of them were together at some point, or what they have just done is sort of talk about how how many aircraft were launched in the air, and Pakistan had launched close to around 42 to 50. Welcome to Inner Defense. Operation Sindoor is back in limelight, especially social media limelight, and especially limelight of this very particularly niche group of people that I follow on social media and online. I'm pretty sure most of my listeners and viewers also will be following them. These are your defense experts, your defense commentators, your strategic experts, your geopolitical experts, who have been decoding. Some of them have been selectively reading from a new report that's come out by a person called Adrian Fontanelles. This is by a group called the Center. This is by a group called the Center for Military History and Perspective Studies, based in Europe, that has put out what I must say is one of the best writings so far I've seen in terms of not analyzing per se, but just reporting of what's happened between the two major aerial confrontations that have taken place in the last few years, not just between India and Pakistan, but also in the world. This is the post-Balakot aerial confrontation and the Operation Sindoor aerial confrontation. Now, the reason I wanted to do an episode on this, and hi Sandeep, by the way, the reason I wanted to do an episode, I don't want to speak for too long and just sitting there just like, ये कितना बोले जा रहा है, मेरे को कोई हाई भी नहीं बोल रहा है, so I just thought. So, Sandeep, the reason I wanted to do this episode actually is because this is exactly what Inner Defense is meant for.
Yeah.
What I mentioned about selective reading. So people are actually taking sentences from this report to further what their perception of the battle was, what their perception of the victory or the loss was. And when you send me the link, so I actually had just read the headlines, by the way. I had read the headlines, the reporting that was done of this report, and the tweets and posts and stuff like that. So I had only read that until you sent me the full report. I read that. And I was like, wow, it's pretty balanced.
Yeah.
It pulls no punches. I mean, it's pretty, I'll tell you something from the abstract. Para number 2, the first sentence, the sentence of the para number 2, first sentence says this clash, talking about Operation Sindoor, this clash between the Pakistan and Indian Air Forces initially saw the former Pakistan achieve a clear tactical victory by shooting down several enemy air fighters, then largely fail in its conduct of strikes over Indian territory, as those were countered by an integrated air defense systems whose effectiveness was to the surprise of the conflict. And then how the Air Force, let's say, it does not say that, but the Air Force, to quote Air Chief Marshal Amarpreet Singh, was on a roll on the night of May 9th and May 10th, which is the decisive salvo that sort of brought the conflict to a pause. Yeah, Sandeep, before we dive into this report, and also I'm going to also talk about the post-Balakot airstrike, because there's some very interesting points that I thought I should discuss with you. Before we dive into this report, your initial impressions of what this report has done and what you thought of when you read it.
Well, I think it's a very balanced report, Dev, as you mentioned, and comes from a neutral third-party observer. Here, Switzerland, neutral country like Switzerland, and they've analyzed the whole operation thoroughly. Sheer economy of words, this report is just 40 pages. And it documents the whole build-up, for someone who's coming in late to the India-Pakistan military rivalry. It's there's a fair bit of backgrounder to this. There is the what we call Pakistan's nuclear weapons-enabled terrorism, but they've got another coinage for that. They, how this evolved. And some very interesting observations over there and this is stuff that we've been discussing, Dave, but they've picked on the fact that how the Indian government has, since 2016, it has been initiating responses for terrorism emanating from Pakistan, starting from the shallow cross-border raids, the surgical strikes, the single airstrike on Balakot in 2019, and then, of course, Operation Sindoor in 2025. So they've picked up all these big, developments on the subcontinent, and they've given a very balanced assessment of how they see this, how they saw this playing out, and who lost, who won. All that is put into very, very clinically examined and dissected in this report. I think it's one of the best reports I've read.
Yeah, true. Completely agree with that. So what we'll do on this episode is we'll focus on what are some of the new takeaways that we've had, and what I want you to do is, with the benefit of your reporting, with the benefit of your own understanding of how things work, how air forces fight, how the Indian Air Force is matched up against the Pakistani Air Force, and what you've read in this report. I want you to bring all of that together. Sure. And give us a picture of certain points that I'm going to talk about. But before that, just a very short sort of recap for our listeners and viewers, so that the context is very clear. There are two aerial engagements that we'll talk about on this episode, and that this report focuses on. One is from 2019, the post Balakot aerial engagement, in which quite infamously you had Wing Commander Abhinandan Vardhaman, then Wing Commander, being shot down and the custody taken by Pakistan for a couple of days. So that operation was in response to what India did. India bombed a terrorist camp in Pakistan in response to a terrorist attack that took place in India, in Jammu and Kashmir, where a suicide bombing killed around 40 CRPF soldiers. The second aerial engagement is Operation Sindoor, specifically 2 days. The day one, when India bombed Pakistan once again in response to a terrorist attack in which around 27 tourists were killed in Pahalgam. And then on the 9th of May 9th, on the night of May 9th and May 10th, when Pakistan launched its response to the May 7th initial salvo by the Indian Air Force, in response to which the Air Force launched attacks very crucially on Pakistani Air Force bases, not terrorist infrastructure like previously, to bring the engagement to a pause after Pakistan called up and asked for a ceasefire. So before we do that, so now that's context clear. But before we now talk about these aerial engagements, I want to take a brief tangent and detour towards the Pakistani Air Force itself, because this report actually builds up. This report builds up to these aerial engagements by talking about how the Indian Air Force has built itself with the help of some Western powers, whether it's France, whether it's Russia, obviously, but not Western powers, and how Pakistan has built its air capabilities. And I'll tell you, Sandeep, I was honestly very surprised to read this report and get a feeling that, the Pakistani Air Force does not seem to be so bad after all in terms of capabilities, at least on paper when you read this report. So I want to talk about the Pakistani Air Force, its evolution, and especially how closely intertwined it is with the Chinese, not the Air Force, but Chinese systems and China itself. Because there's this one sentence in this report that really struck me, is that thanks to the close cooperation between Pakistan and China, the Chinese were able to gain access to the lessons learned from an Air Force with extensive operational experience. It's almost as the Pakistani Air Force's experiences have helped China build better and more advanced fighter jets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt on that, because China has the technology, right? Pakistan has the combat experience. So it's actually a meeting of both of this that you see over here, what the report outlines. The fact is that the PLAF is a newbie when it comes to air combat, right? It's barely seen any action. There have been some skirmishes in the 50s, of course, over Korea, 60s and 70s, but modern day combat using 4th generation and 4th generation plus fighter jets, the PLAF is not as conversant with it as, say, the Pakistan Air Force is. So that is where they lean on the PAF for a lot of experience. So they've been doing a number of air exercises over the last couple of years, almost a decade now, that they've been exercising together very closely. And this coincides with the PAF kind of pivoting towards Chinese equipment. The JF-17 is a classic case, and of course the J-10. and a whole lot of other air defense radars and long-range missiles like the PL-15. All of this is of Chinese origin because the PAF kind of, decided that they were not going to be under the sanctions regime that the F-16. The F-16 is, it's a very capable aircraft, but at the end of the day, they're at the mercy of the Americans for that. And that is something that Asim Munir managed to get last year with his frequent visits to the US. They got that massive upgrade package, 600 million plus upgrade package for the 70 odd F-16s that they have. So they're operating a mix of Chinese aircraft and American aircraft, the F-16s. So the combat mass comes from the Chinese aircraft of the kind that I've mentioned. And the tip of the spear are the F-16s.
Yeah.
So that is the kind of mix that they're looking at. And this is where the synergy between China and Pakistan is so important. And this synergy, it extends beyond just knowledge of air combat maneuvers or the fact that the PAF extensively exercises with other Western air forces, and therefore it has knowledge of their tactics and all that, where the PLAF would face these kind of tactics in a hypothetical war with the US over Taiwan, for instance. So that is important. But the other big takeaway for us from Sindoor was the fact that you had, while on the ground, you have two fronts. The Indian military always calls it a two-front situation, that you have a Western adversary and a Northern adversary. On the ground, that might be the case. But in the electronic domain, when you're looking at C4ISR and command control systems, radar, satellite pictures and all that, they are one front. Yeah. Pakistan and China are fused together. Literally, real-time exchange of data, takes place. And that's a big worry for us.
Yeah. In fact, there's something called, that the report talks about, something called the Link 17.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come to that when we reach the Operation Sindoor part. So talking about the post-Balakot air skirmish between India and Pakistan, there's not really much actually to go into in this report per se, but there's one point that stood out. So I want to discuss that. So one point is that. The second is something that a former Air Force chief, retired now, B.S. Dhanova, said on an interview to one of our sister publications, the London Top. We'll have that clip, not clip, but the audio play out there right now.
Was it the right call? अगर हमें मालूम था कि F-16 उधर से आ रहे हैं, तो हम MiG-21 बाइसन को क्यों उड़ा रहे हैं? हमारे पास बेटर प्लेन्स हैं. पर क्या वो
है? कौन बेटर प्लेन था? कौन सा बेटर प्लेन था? श्रीनगर में सिर्फ MiG-21 थे. और क्यों MiG-21 थे? क्योंकि कब वक्त वहाँ पे जो हमारा ब्लास्ट पैन है उसके अंदर Su-30 घुस नहीं सकता. ओके, हमें HAL ने 27 देने थे मिराज 2000 अपग्रेड. ठीक है, मिराज 2000 अपग्रेड घुस सकता है. पर डिड वी हैव 27? वी हैड ओनली 7. अच्छा, LCA था, LCA के वेपन ही नहीं थे. LCA हवाई जहाज तो था, पर जो अभिनंदन के पास सेल्फ प्रोटेक्शन जैमर था, उसके बाद बियॉन्ड विजुअल रेंज मिसाइल था. LCA दैट टाइम, उस टाइम की बात कर रहा हूँ, अभी की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ. ही डिड नॉट हैव. His Bison was, I'm not saying it's a better aircraft than LCA, but he had all the weapons. So MiG-21 was flying out there because we didn't have any other choice. Personally speaking, you should ask him, should the MiG-27 be there? No. प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने भी बोला, अगर रफाल होता नतीजा कुछ और होता. करेक्ट ना? पर देन ऐसे थोड़े होता है. दुश्मन आता है, आपके पास जो होता आप उसी से लड़ते हो. यू कांट से कि पहले मेरे को, अगर आप कार्ड्स का गेम खेल रहे हो, हु इज अ बेटर पर्सन, या आप ये थोड़े बोलो कि पहले सारी यक्के मेरे को दो फिर मैं तुम्हारे साथ खेलूंगा. यू आर अ गुड लीडर इफ यू गेट अ गेम ऑफ कार्ड्स विच इज गॉट एसेस एंड जोकर्स. How do you manage your aces and jokers and still win? That is leadership.
One, Sandeep, about from the report, there's a missile called the Popeye missile.
Yeah.
I actually had not come across this name or read about this missile. So I wanted to tell me what this missile is. Because the report says that of the strike package that struck the terrorist camps during Operation Sindoor, as it was called, 5 of them were carrying the Spice 2000 precision guided bombs. This is something public knowledge, everyone knows. I in fact remember reaching out to you and I wrote a story about that back then. And one of them was armed with the Popeye missile, which unfortunately failed, is what the report says. So what's this missile? One. And second, that clip right now, B.S. Dhanova was asked, the Air Chief Marshal was asked that why did you have MiG-21s
Yeah.
launching for that dogfight? Why did you not have more advanced jets? His response, to summarize what he said and sort of paraphrase it, essentially boils down to how the HAL failed to deliver upgraded Mirages.
Yeah.
So, and he basically says that I had to deal with the pack of cards that was dealt to me, and not really. I can't not go into the fight saying कि यार मुझे सब इक्के दे दो तभी जाके मैं लड़ने जाऊंगा. But I had to just go with what I had. So, your thoughts on those 2 points?
No, absolutely. I think that see, the Popeye is an Israeli missile. It's an air-to-ground missile, and it has a range of about 200 kilometers plus.
Right.
And it's it would be like the equivalent of a JDAM, right? One of those bomb kit kind of thing. And it has a warhead of I'm trying to remember, about 200 kgs. It's a precise strike weapon, and this is what they used. There are two. There's a Popeye and there's a crystal maze as well. So this is the weapon, the ordnance that the IAF used during the Balakot attack, and it did hit the target. I mean, there's a lot of doubt about whether it actually hit. Where it did not. A lot of that speculation was there. There were certain Western think tanks which said that, look, no building was hit, nothing happened, the missile just fell on the side. And I think the biggest learning for the Air Force from Balakot was the fact that you need to have positive bomb damage assessment. BDA is so important. And which is why, if you saw in Operation Sindoor, there was extensive bomb damage assessment that was done, and the briefing by the 3 DGMOs, where they came out with very extensive data, details, visual evidence of taken from Maxar satellite images, which showed precisely where they damaged which airfield, which radar site, which command post, all of that. So those were very big learnings from Balakot, which we kind of implemented in Operation Sindoor. Of course, the one thing that we didn't do neither in Balakot nor in Operation Sindoor was the narrative part.
Yeah.
And I think that is where Pakistan kind of, you can say, initially, as with the tactical part of it, they did score certain victories on the narrative war part of it. And we were unable to kind of, while we did carry out devastating, counter attacks on Pakistani airfields and their infrastructure. I mean, almost 50 missiles were fired, air-to-ground ordnance was fired at them. The Air Force was literally knocked out. They achieved air superiority. The IAF had achieved air superiority in vast swaths of Pakistani airspace. But despite that, the way the narrative played out was something entirely different. But, coming back to this report, this actually puts it all in perspective. It just gives you a very clear black and white assessment of what really played out on the ground on the 10th of May.
Yeah. And about what Air Chief Marshal B.S. Dhanova said?
Well, there were delays on the Mirage 2000 project upgrade, no doubt about it, right? But you have to look at whether it was just HAL that delayed it, or was it a delay on the part of the OEM as well, right? Which was Dassault. There were significant delays at both ends, both in Dassault case and HAL. So I don't think it would be fair to only blame HAL. The fact is that that program was, I think it ran 2 years or 3 years late. And it was a very expensive program.
Yeah.
$2.2 billion dollars or euros, I don't recall which, but the figure is over 2 billion for upgrading the entire fleet of 52 Mirages. So there were delays, of course. But, the fact is that there is a kind of a collective responsibility that we need to take for the fact that we've not been able to replace the MiG-21s. Yeah. I mean, it's a travesty if you're continuing to fly these as your frontline aircraft. However good the upgrade would have been, they are, 10 to 15 years past their sell-by date. Yeah. And these should have been phased out long ago. So we've discussed this in, previous
just the last
episodes.
Episode,
where, it's just too bad that we didn't get those platforms. And possibly, we didn't invest in the kind of technologies, the kill chains that you're talking about, software-defined radios, unjammable radios. Abhinandan was down because he didn't have, a jam-proof data link with ground control. So these are things that should have been put into place a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's move to Operation Sindoor.
Yeah.
Talking about night 1, May 7th, is when the Indian Air Force launched the attack on terrorist camps in Pakistan. And the Pakistan Air Force responded that very night. Uh, the report calls it one of the biggest aerial confrontations in recent years, quite rightfully so, because if you look at the numbers that the report has managed to sort of calculate, at some point, India had around 86 aircraft in the air at some point. I'm not sure if all of them were together at some point, or what they have just done is like, sort of talk
Be
about
spread
how,
out, I guess, yeah.
how many aircraft were launched in the air, and Pakistan had launched close to around 42 to 50.
Yeah.
So a majority of them at some point would have been in sort of an aerial confrontation. Now, the one sort of theme that I've gotten from this report, whether you talk about night 1 or night 2, is how all these confrontations are so not what I would picture of a dogfight, of aerial battle.
Yeah.
This is your high-tech modern world where the planes don't see each other.
Yeah, that's
they
right.
are hundreds of kilometers away. There is so much of backroom tech involved in terms of your AVOCs that support the data gathering, the data dissemination, your ground radars, your ground support, your air defense.
Yeah.
So it just paints a very fascinating picture of
Right.
what actually took place that night. And yes, the report points out that it was after a point of time, after the successful strikes on the terrorist camps, that it was a tactical failure for the Air Force. So I wanted to, Sandeep, take from what you've read in this report, what you know of, and describe the night of May 7th for us that took place during Operation Sindoor, now with the benefit of hindsight and the new information that you read over.
Yeah, well, so on the night of May 7th is when the attacks, we launched the attacks on the terror training, the launch pads, multiple launch pads of terrorists all across the line of control and further down. And we struck very precisely at those launch pads. And the strikes on the 7th of May were precisely only at the terrorist launch pads and not at military infrastructure, right? Whereas when the Pakistanis retaliated, within a few hours, they fired at all our aircraft, right? Now, if you looked at the SOP would be to do a suppression of enemy air defenses. Before your aircraft would go into combat, you would have to destroy, degrade his air defenses. You would have to, bring down everything that would illuminate your aircraft. And you have to understand, Dave, that this was an extraordinarily difficult operation for the Indian Air Force, that you have given your adversary enough warning that a strike is coming. Of course, the only thing that would not be known is the exact time of the strike. And it was very clear by then that it would be an airstrike.
Yeah.
So he was already on alert. And he had enough time, he even had enough time, they say, to fly in shipments of PL-15 missiles, 200 kilometer range, BVR missiles, long range air-to-air missiles. And so what they did was they laid an ambush for the Indian Air Force and aircraft. And this report mentions 2 or 3 aircraft having gone down. There is, of course, no confirmation from our side till date of this. My sense is that the PAF, the only reason for the existence of the PAF is to shoot down Indian Air Force fighters, right? I've heard this multiple times from Indian Air Force veterans, and I kind of, I didn't believe it until Op Sindoor, where the only, it's bizarre that you don't invest in anything else. You don't invest in air-to-ground munitions, you don't invest in air defense radars, you don't invest in systems like IACCS. You only invest in fighter jets and you have, long-range air-to-air missiles because their only thing is to knock down Indian Air Force fighter jets. So that is what they did, according to the report, on the opening hours, and which is why they say that they won a tactical victory. But tactics alone don't determine strategy, right? If you put your entire military warfighting strategy on tactics, you risk becoming Pervez Musharraf. Now, Musharraf is a classic commando general, right? He will say that I will do this, I will move all my troops, Northern Light Infantry will go in Kargil, they will sit over here. Brilliant tactically, but strategically, what will happen? India will not respond, they will do this, and then we will, strangle them in the Siachen. We will cut off the road and all that. How did you come to that conclusion that India would not respond? So, this is very similar. That tactically you might have got the things right, but strategically you get a beating like Musharraf did in Kargil, where he didn't see the larger consequences. There's no way but for India to strike back. And the way they did, it took them completely by surprise, right? They thought it would be like, they're going to just give up all that territory and stuff like that. So similarly here, the PAF seem to have invested very heavily in air-to-air combat. But like I mentioned, they missed the other pieces of this thing. Air combat is not just about fighters flying long-range air-to-air missiles. You have to protect your air bases. You have to have adequate dispersal. You have to have air defense cover, air defense network. So air power is much more than just fighter aircraft with long-range missiles.
Yeah.
And that's what comes out very clearly through this. 7th of May, they did score some tactical victories, but by the 10th of May, it was a strategic defeat for them. And, if you were to use a cricketing analogy on the subcontinent, right? It's like the first couple of overs, one team bowls really well, it gets a couple of wickets, but it loses the match, right? So this is what Op Sindoor was. The Pakistanis seem to have claimed some wickets in the opening hours of the match, which the Chief of Defence Staff also alluded to in Singapore, General Chauhan. But they lost the match. And that's clearly what this report says. Very dispassionately analyzes it. And of course puts in those other big things, vulnerabilities for the PAF. Very, very scary vulnerabilities, which no PAF chief or no military chief can do anything about. And the two big vulnerabilities which this report outlines, to my mind, is the fact that they do not have geographical depth. They are challenged by geography. Pakistan is it's a narrow country. It doesn't have strategic depth. It's 1,000 kilometers wide, and it's about 1,800 kilometers, length, north to south. It's like a trapezoid like that. And if you were to put it into just 4 quadrants, if you were to draw 4 quadrants, you would find a majority of the PAF air bases very close to the border with India, the international border and the LOC, right? And a majority of them, they have about 20 air bases. Majority of these bases are concentrated in Punjab province, very close to the international border and the line of control. It made sense in the past where, you didn't have ordnance that could fire over the border, that you actually needed. These are all bases made for the era of dogfight, where the IAF has to cross the border and do this dogfight with the PAF and then come back, and then you'll bring down a few aircraft and all that. But in today's era of the BVR combat era that you mentioned, it just doesn't work that way. You have air-to-ground ordnance, which have the BrahMos missile has a range of 500 kilometers, which means you can, sit 300 kilometers back in the rear of Indian airspace and fire it into PAF airbase. And this is exactly what happened on the 10th of May. And when they realized, my God, we haven't invested in all of this. We have no way of stopping the BrahMos missiles. Our airfields are so vulnerable. They disrupted the entire, OODA loop of the Pak Air Force, and which is why then they said, look, we'd like a ceasefire. They called the Americans on the 10th of May. And of course, the other big vulnerability that this report mentions is something, again, that the military doesn't seem to have any answers for. They only keep exacerbating it. It is the economy. The Pakistan economy cannot afford to buy the kind of modern equipment that it needs. Right? It can buy fighters. You can set up a PAF camera. You can, build aircraft with Russian engines and Chinese know-how. But beyond that point, you need to set up the kind of air defense network, the long-range missiles and all that, which they don't seem to have the financial muscle for. And that's a big vulnerability for them again. So these two big things, revenge of geography, the lack of strategic depth, and the fact that you have an economy that is $130 billion in debt, it points a very bleak picture for the PAF that you will last the first couple of hours of combat, but as India starts climbing the escalation ladder, you suddenly realize how vulnerable you are, and then you have to dial Uncle Sam or Uncle Trump.
Right. Before I talk about the night 2, that is the night of May 9th and May 10th, and what happened, now what do we know of that night from this report? Just one quick tangent, because this one sentence struck me particularly, is, and this is I think when the IAF was bombing terrorist camps on the first salvo of May 7th. The report says that at one point, one of the strike groups, they did a pop-up maneuver, which I can visually picture. I can just sort of imagine what it must be like, flying very low and then suddenly going straight up like a vertical thing into the into the air. But it says in doing so, the aircraft deliberately exposed themselves to interception by Pakistani fighters and engagement by ground-based air defense systems. The use of the word deliberately in this report sort of, it made me curious. I'm not sure what the author was trying to say here exactly. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I really have no idea about that particular reference. I haven't caught that yet. But, I want to quickly, add a caveat, Dave. The 7th May opening salvos were fired by both the Air Force and the Army.
And the Army, actually, the report also talks about that, yes.
So it was, out of the 9 strikes, about 7 were by the Indian Army, where they used long-range artillery, the Excalibur shells, for instance. All the border, the positions that were close to the border were taken out by the Army. The artillery, precision artillery was used, Excalibur rounds were used, and the distant targets were fired at by the Air Force, 2 of them. So, but the thing is that because you had so many air assets in the air, that is when the air-to-air dogfight kind of combat, air-to-air combat, beyond visual range combat is said to have taken place. But this particular thing, I mean, I have no idea what exactly they're talking about, the pop-up kind of thing. But it's very clear from this that there seem to be missiles were fired both sides. Some seem to have hit targets, and of course India did fire back and bring down something like 10 Pakistani aircraft, as we've said, including one taken out by an S-400 at about 300 kilometers. One of the longest range shots. It is the S-400. In a sense, it's said to be an air defense radar, but because of this enormous range, it actually becomes an offensive weapon system. Right. It's no longer a defensive thing. If you have oversight over your adversary's airspace, then you're able to control, what can fly, what can't fly over there. So it's an eye opener actually. This combat Op Sindoor in many ways, in the way that air combat will be played out between near peer adversaries. That's why a lot of Western countries would be looking at this very closely, including the fact that a lot of Chinese hardware was used, the PL-15s, for instance. They used their version of the AWACS and their data links and all of that. So they would have been looking at this very closely, because this is precisely the kind of engagements that the Americans would face in a situation over Taiwan, for instance. If they were to come up against the PLAF, you can well be sure that you will have PL-15s coming your way, and they'll come in very silently. You will not notice them because they would be vectored by other AWACS or satellites or something like that.
Right. We'll talk more about this, but after a quick break.
You know who I'm talking about, right? You've had your own thoughts on Deepinder Goyal's startup.
I don't want to get into any legal trouble, but I'm saying anybody who sells you this pipe dream that you're going to live to 150, 170, 200 as a snake oil peddler.
What do you make of this entire temple, as it's being called or speculated so far, because there's no official launch? Nobody knows what it is, by the way, because it's not public.
I know what it is, because I've had somebody from Zomato's team reach out to me. So it's a freaking tracker. That's what it is. So that temple device is just a tracker. It's not going to improve your longevity. They are also trademarking this pseudometric called brain flow, which has nothing to do with your actual brain's flow.
Pseudometric?
Yeah, it's a pseudometric brain flow. They have trademarked that metric. You're ready to put in $25 million in your new longevity startup. You're not ready to lose some money by not sending notifications post 9 p.m.
Deepinder Goyal has gone on record to say that there is no food cooked in his house. He only orders from Zomato. He and his wife both.
Can he go on record and say that that food is good for everybody? I mean, wasn't Zomato caught up in some adulterated paneer case? They are sending notifications at night that ask people to eat chole bhature. Probably just stop sending the notifications. Not too much to ask for, right?
Welcome back. Sandeep will now talk about the night of May 9th and May 10th when Pakistan launched its response to what India did on May 7th. This report talks about how at the end of it, end of that night, the Indian Air Force managed to have air superiority, managed to have that ability to hit Pakistani air bases, which I would presume is a much more challenging task than just hitting terrorist camps, because these air facilities would be having their air defenses and their own set of protections. Also very interesting, I sort of also lived through this because I remember that night, I remember waking early in the morning. I remember lots of social media chatter. I remember videos coming out of Pakistan of fire at some of the air bases. And then a message landing on one of our internal groups at my newsroom that there's a PC going to be held by India early morning at 7:30 or so, 7:30 or so. So I quickly, woke up. I was at home, so I logged in on my laptop because there was no time to rush to office at that time. And then suddenly the PC got postponed, and I was like, "Ye kya ho gaya?" So I thought, "Ki hua hoga kuch." This report actually tells me what happened, because apparently, so the IAF had launched the first salvo. Soon after Pakistan's salvo had sort of ebbed at around 2 a.m. IAF launched its counter-strike, and then apparently the IAF detected some preparations being made by Pakistan to launch another counter-strike, which is when the IAF launched a second strike at around 10 in the morning, which I'm guessing is the reason the press conference got postponed. And the press conference eventually was held around, I think, if I'm not wrong, 11 or 12, where the entire night was detailed. This night has been described by Air Chief Marshal AP Singh as the night the Air Force was on a song. And if you read the report, you can sort of get why he says that. So Sandeep, again, based on what you've read in the report and based on what you know of that night, just take us through once again of what happened that night.
The night of the 9th.
Yes, and the 9th.
The night of the 9th is when, the thing is that this is when the escalation ladder kicks in.
Yes.
Where the idea was for India to carry out a number of strikes, not targeting Pakistani military infrastructure and targeting only terrorist launch pads, command centers, all related to the Lashkar and the Jaish, right, all across. And the idea was saying that we have done this and this is the thing, this is our response to what you did in Pahalgam. Now, Pakistan decided to escalate that. They said no. And if you look at it, they've report again very clearly, mentions how this escalation ladder works. It goes here. So it starts on of course, 22nd April is Pahalgam. Then you go to 7th May. Then you have on the 8th, after what happened, the long range, beyond visual range combat. That is when on the 8th, you have the Air Force starting suppression of enemy air defenses, SIAD attacks, where they start the thing in Chunyan is taken out, radar, air defense radar over there is taken out. There's one near Karachi that's taken out. And these are basically the eyes of the Pakistan Air Force, right? They're ground-based eyes which look deep inside Indian territory. So the Indian Air Force began taking those out. And I still remember when I was in the studio with Gaurav on the 8th, it was. And the one visual that I remember was the Harop drone, the kamikaze drone, just coming in like that. So somebody had captured it with a smartphone. And the minute I saw that, I knew what was going on. I said, this is a SIAD thing. The Air Force has now realized that this is something they should have done possibly on the first day. Before they launched the thing. So then they started targeting the Pakistan military. Now this is again a response to what Pakistan had done throughout the 7th. Then you struck back at the 8th. You started hitting Pakistani positions, particularly their radar sites, blinding them. Then the Pakistan Air Force then responded, right? So they started launching drone attacks,
Yes.
and including the long-range rockets that they fired at us. One of them were directed at Delhi,
Yeah.
which was shot down at an airbase here.
Which the Air Force called a fast-moving rocket, as if there are slow-moving ones.
Yeah, yes, we discussed that. So the so if you look at the responses of the PAF, so at every point, the Indian Air Force had given an exit for Pakistan, right? Look, we have done what we had to do. Now it's up to you. If you want to respond, we will, hit back. So you had, after the strikes against the LET thing, you had, of course, the PAF engagement. Then they started launching their waves of drone attacks and all. And this is where the report actually mentions that this is when India's hidden strength came out, which was
Air defense.
IACCS.
IACCS.
Yeah, which is something that we had invested in over several decades. So the PAF thought that they would overwhelm our air defenses through these, drone attacks. We absorbed the entire thing of that. So then they came back with the SEAD attacks. Indian Air Force came back with the SEAD attacks. And then Pakistan again responded on the 9th with another wave of attacks. And I think the last straw was that rocket that was fired towards Delhi.
Towards Delhi.
The Fatah rocket. It wasn't a missile, it was a long-range rocket. And I think that is where they realized that the PAF wasn't going to take it lying down, and they would come back again. And therefore, we had to achieve escalation dominance. And that is when 10th of May happened. And in 10th of May, I think in 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes in fact, you hit a dozen PAF air bases starting from POK right down to Sindh, the entire length and breadth of Pakistan. And that, I think, was a turning point, because what has happened is that, again, this geographical vulnerability kicks in. The fact that you have all your air bases here lined up all along the boundary with India, and the PAF withdrew from all of these frontline air bases, the main ones, towards the depth air bases.
Yeah.
And when you did that, you disrupted the entire thing. That you ceded air superiority to the Indian Air
Give that
Force.
space.
Your S-400s are hunting over there. They can take shots. We brought down a number of their aircraft. We, of course, destroyed some in the hangars. We took out some aircraft. Long-range shots were taken. And it was chaos. And what I think happened over here, which the report doesn't mention in great detail, but, as I say in Hindi, samajhdar ko ishara kafi hai. The knocks that were made on the Pakistani special weapon storage sites.
Kirana Hills.
Kirana Hills.
I actually mentioned that to talk about.
It is mentioned here, but we have not owned up those strikes.
Air Marshal A.M. Bharti, the Air Force Director General of Operations, he had
He
a
was
very
asked.
nice smirk when he was asked. He denied it. He said no, but he had a nice smirk. When
He
was
had
answering that.
that was a classic response, and so it disrupted their entire posture, their nuclear readiness posture as well, because for they have two nuclear vectors, the Pakistan. One is your airdropped gravity bombs, and the second is the TELs, the transporter erector launchers, which is your Abdali and Shaheen missiles, which are mounted on truck mounted 6x6, 8x8 Wanshan TELs. Both of these require aircraft, right? So you need aircraft, of course, to drop the gravity bombs, and the aircraft and the airfields are near the special weapon storage sites. One of them is Kirana Hills. There are a number of these special weapon storage sites, 3 or 4 primarily, but they're all focused in and around Sargodha and the vicinity. And when the PAF kind of withdrew from these air bases towards their depth bases, back towards the rear, towards Afghanistan and Iran, those air bases, it disrupted this entire nuclear posture. So you had these special weapon storage sites, but no aircraft to take the bombs. And because there were no aircraft, your TLs could not come out because your transporter erector launchers also need air cover to some extent. So that kind of spook them. So, because we went up the escalation ladder, Pakistan did the thing and they de-escalated. Now, you might ask, as a lot of people have, about why did we,
Agree to it.
agree to this ceasefire? Oh, we should have
Because
gone
our
in and-
objective was met.
That's right. So, I've asked this on a number of occasions to a number of people who were part of the thing. And they said, look, we don't want to get into this Russia-Ukraine kind of unending spiral of conflict. And we were very clear on that. We achieved what we had to do on the 7th of May. And 10th of May was, you achieved air superiority. You achieved escalation dominance. You forced your adversary to say, okay, fine, I've had enough. I want a ceasefire. And we were okay with that. Now we're looking at it in the hindsight of this information warfare thing that Pakistan launched and said, oh no, maybe I should have gone back and, destroyed a few more bases, or, I could have launched a naval attack as well and all of that. But if you have to look at it, it was the whole objective of this thing was to respond to the Pahalgam attack of 22nd April of 2025. It was not to take back POK. It was not to, take back the Haji Pir Pass or anything like that. It was a very specific politico-military objective, which was to launch a series of attacks on terrorist infrastructure and to tell Pakistan that, look, for 4 decades you've been using terror as an instrument of state policy. You think it's a low-cost option, and I'll keep bleeding you. I'm going to increase the cost of your low-cost option. I'll make it a high-cost option for you. So I will knock out your infrastructure. I'll knock out your bases. I'll hit your aircraft and all that. And you have to then take a call whether you want to keep climbing up this ladder, because the higher you climb, the more will be the damage to your infrastructure. And I think they've understood that, because if you see Munir's moves, and we've spoken about this in the past, Dev, if you've seen the way Munir sped around the world, reaching out to the United States and Saudi Arabia, it was just to compensate for the lack of strategic depth. What he lacked on the ground on the 10th of May, he tried to make up with external tie-ups, alliances, going back to Saudi Arabia. And in the case of Saudi Arabia, it was a mutual fear. Saudi Arabia is afraid of Israel. Munir is afraid of India. So they kind of made common cause. So all of this was to compensate for this thing of what happened on the 10th of May. So while they would have had some initial successes, by the 10th of May, it was very clear. 2 words, air superiority had been established. And page 39, I think, is very, very emphatic.
Yeah.
He says that by the morning of May 10th, the Indian Air Force had succeeded in achieving air superiority over a significant portion of Pakistan's airspace. This enabled it to continue long-range strikes on enemy infrastructure at will, which means you could fire whatever you wanted to and it wouldn't have mattered. They would not have been able to shoot back. I've used a term. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. If your adversary's geography is only so much, and you have the ordnance to target him wherever you choose to, then there's no way that he can overcome you in any kind of conflict. And I think they saw the way it was playing out on the ground, and which is why that call went to the White House.
Yeah. Right. I'll move to a couple of sort of tangents from this report, things that I wanted to talk to you about because I read them in this report and I was like, hey, this is a good point. Of course, Kirana Hills was going to be one of them, but you already talked about that, so I don't think I need to go there. The report does say that there is evidence of 2 holes, knocks, like you said, basically telling if the knocks are because of Indian Air Force, telling Pakistan that, hey, we can also reach there if we want to. So I won't talk about that, but I want to talk about quickly on all of these. The link 17 that came up a couple of times in this report. Once at the very beginning when it was talking about how the Pakistani Air Force has evolved over the years and how it's built this link 17 supposedly with some Chinese help. Then it comes up again when it talks about the night of May 7th when Pakistan was able to make India suffer some tactical defeats and losses of some aircraft. 3, I think, is what the report counts. So what is this link 17? How, as much as you know about it, and how does it work? Because it describes something that in previous episodes we've talked is very difficult because India also has a situation. It's about integrating integrating defense equipment from different countries and making them function in one ecosystem, which is quite challenging.
It is indeed. And I think where the Pakistanis worked on this from 2019 onwards after Balakot.
Right, okay.
They started working on it with the Chinese because they weren't getting the kind of assistance they wanted from the United States. So they turned towards the Chinese hardware and of course the software. So the Link 17 is, I think it's a play on the Link 16. Link 16 is the NATO encrypted data link, which gives all NATO aircraft, a common operating picture. That COP is the most important thing, where you know where you are, where the adversary is, where all your assets are. It's like a video game picture of the entire battle space.
A God's eye view of the battlefield.
Yeah, it's like that. And then, and the beauty of a common operational picture like this is that if one aircraft launches a missile, that missile can be steered by another aircraft or by a AWACS, homed in onto the target, and the missile will be fired completely silently. He won't be active, which means that when the missile is fired, the radar will not open up. It will be fired cold. It will be a cold launch at the adversary, and it will be steered towards the enemy. And at that appropriate moment, based on the coordinates that the AWACS is giving you, it will open the radar at the very last minute when the adversary will not have time to escape. So these are the benefits of having, a common operating picture, which the Link 16 does, and which I believe, I have no information on how the Pakistanis have done it, but I would imagine it's a similar situation that they have a common operational picture, which integrates all their assets. And the advantage there is that many of their assets are of Chinese origin.
Yeah.
And that's a natural advantage. You have your J-10s, you have your J-17s, you have Chinese radars, you have Chinese data links, you have Chinese missiles, all of that, it really works. Now, in our case, it's a little complicated because we have many things. You have the Rafales, you have East, you have West, you have indigenous, you have many things which aren't talking to each other. It's a nightmare. Yeah. So when you say that you should standardize, this is one of the reasons that you should have. And I think we are working on links like that. We will get there eventually. Like just as we did after Balakot, we started getting in software-defined radios, and there was a case of fratricide there. Very unfortunate situation of a helicopter being shot down. Yes. So you have the Vayu link, I believe, which is again a Link 16 kind of thing, but which informs the Air Force about all their friendly assets that are there in a particular time and space. So things like this have to be put into place, and I think the Air Force has learned its lessons from 19 and of course 25, and will implement these in a matter of months, I would say, if not years.
Right.
Because we are actually in the middle of an operational, Sindoor is technically the operation still continues.
Yeah, right. The second tangent was about the IACCS, the Integrated Air Command Control System. India that has this, which was the winner. If you want to say, of Operation Sindoor. We've talked about this on a previous episode of this, this magic command center.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is. Maybe Delhi mein Gurgaon pe pata nahi.
I'm going to give you the Air Marshal Bharti smile.
Right. So but okay. Okay. I'll ask you later. Right. So anyway. This famous photo went viral, all of them masked up, not because like you had told me back then, not because COVID was back, because, sensitive designations and assignments for them. This one room, which sort of controlled the entire battle, so to speak, for those days and nights, by the way, not just one single battle. The report talks about how that was thought of after the Purulia arms drop. I never knew that. So I want that story, not the entire story of how this system came into being, but how the arms drop led to the idea of the system.
That's one of my earliest stories as a reporter. It's like that long back, 31 years back.
Not age-shaming you, but I just had a feeling कि जब मैं पूछूंगा ना, ये संदीप बोलेगा, I had written about this, early in my career.
I did. I was there on the ground in Santa Cruz Airport and it was a small terminal back then.
Yeah.
It was late 95, I remember correctly.
Yes.
December 95. And what had happened was there was an aircraft, an AN-26, that was chartered from the Russians. And it had a mixed bag crew of CIS countries. That's a former Soviet Union countries. It had Peter Bleach was the pilot. I think he was British. And he had a bunch of people from Estonia and Latvia and those kind of things. And he had a very interesting character on board called Kim Devi.
Yes.
And Kim Devi was the guy who was that Anand Margi thing. And this was meant to be a arms drop for the Anand Margi cult in West Bengal. And they were at the receiving end of a lot of government, heat. And this was meant to be an external assistance kind of thing for the Anand Margis, that they were going to be given AK-47s and grenades and all of that ammunition and stuff. So this Latvian aircraft, the AN-26, chartered by Kim Devi, flew in on over India, and I think it did the arms drop, and then it went into Myanmar. It did a complete thing, and I think if I remember correctly, it went down to Thailand, and then it came back again via Indian airspace, and it was flying back over Indian airspace. And the thing was that at that point, the Indian Air Force realized that they had no idea. There was this guy who was hanging around, like flying in, dropping hundreds of AK-47s in this thing over Purulia and West Bengal, in these villages.
And the Air Force had no clue.
And the Air Force had no idea what was going on, because they said, wait, which command does this come under? Oh, this comes under Allahabad. This guy is gone from... And, it was not one integrated network that they had. So this guy was going in from one Air Defense Command thing to another one. And they weren't talking to each other, right? So they flew out. And the thing is that if he hadn't flown back in via India, we would have never known about this. So Kim Devi came back with this thing. They had modified this aircraft to, they cut a hatch into it, I remember, and dropped this thing. And they came back to Santa Cruz Airport, which is where I was on the ground there. We were like, hey, what the hell is going on? We got some report of some aircraft that had been caught trying to drop weapons, and it had been force landed by MiG-21s. So they'd given him a warning.
So the second time it came back,
they were waiting for it.
Right.
They said, hey, this is the aircraft that, did this arms drop. It's come back. Hey, force him back. So he came back via Mumbai, and the aircraft was landed. It was forced to land in Mumbai, and Kim Devi escaped from there. He just jumped over the boundary wall.
Infamously.
And he was apparently even refueling the aircraft. I mean, it was something as bizarre as that. And so the Air Force said, we can't allow this to happen. Air Force, in times of war, it'd be catastrophic. Imagine bombers flying around. You have no idea. One bomber came in from here, flew out over there, re-entered, and then did another bombing run. You know how embarrassing that is? So that is when this entire thing of IACCS was soared, and they started creating all these nodes across India. The command post, of course, is buried. It's at a secure location. That photograph that emerged. And it's one of the biggest Indian successes, because as the report mentions, it leveraged, this is one area where we've leveraged our software skills, as this IT nation. And this is the time when India was coming into its own as a IT power of repute. And that is when we, and the Air Force, and full marks to the Air Force for putting this, conceptualizing the system. A lot of, people within the Air Force have worked to realize this. And the proof of the pudding was the nights following the 7th of May, when literally you had set up this force shield kind of thing, which had integrated everything from, your shoulder fired missiles to your ZSU-23s to L-70 guns, all the way up to your S-400 things. So you have again the common operating picture that I mentioned in the air. The Air Force has that on the ground, where they have a complete situational awareness of everything that's going on the ground and what all their radars are seeing. That's like a God's eye view that they have. And they're able to allocate almost automatically. They're able to allocate, if there is a drone coming in from this thing, they will allocate a weapon to that. If there's an aircraft coming over here or this ground to air, air to ground munition that's been dropped, they have a particular vector to tackle that. So that's a fantastic system that they have.
Yeah, it's a good point because when we say that the S-400 was so nicely used, when the Akash system was so Akash Tir was so effectively used, that only happened because you had the IACCS.
Yeah.
It knew which one to use when.
Yes.
When do you want to use your S-400? When do you want to use your Akash Tir? When do you want to use your even closer range air defense systems?
So the Akash Tir is the Indian Army's version of that. That's at the lower level, which they have their guns and they have their shoulder-fired missiles and all that. And that is linked into the Indian Air Force's IACCS. And of course, they want the Indian Navy also to plug into that wherever they can. So the Navy also kind of feeds in data into that.
Yeah.
So, and what the Prime Minister mentioned last year on 15th of August, which is your the Sudarshan Chakra, is nothing but a super IACCS with not just the ability to knock down your platforms and your intercepting drones and missiles, a kind of a shield, but also the ability to launch rockets and missiles at the adversary. So it'll be like a 2-in-1. It's a defensive and an offensive system at the same time.
Right. One last small tangent point, because I've always been meaning to ask you this question, but never found the right opportunity. I think now is the one. Because the word scramble comes up quite often in this report. Scramble in the terms of Air Force's scramble, when you have to scramble an aircraft to sort of intercept an incoming enemy aircraft. I've always wondered, what's the picture like in an Air Force base? So I'm not talking about like a very high pressure environment like Operation Sindoor, where every wing of your services is on high alert. But I imagine right now at every airbase across the country, you would have a couple of pilots sitting in some break room on alert. They might have to fly at any moment, right?
Yes.
What are they wearing? Are they like fully kitted out? And I don't know if you can tell us or it's classified, but what would be the usual sort of reaction time for, alarm to be raised and the pilot getting up, sitting in the cockpit and taking to the air?
No, minutes, literally minutes. He'd be up in the air. The readiness, it depends on the kind of readiness posture that they're in.
Different levels of
But so currently, I would imagine, I've no information of what the readiness levels are now. But given the fact that you have a Op Sindoor that is still, it's still on, it's not been officially called off, you would be at a readiness level that would be at a higher level. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's at a higher level than it was preceding March or April of 2025.
Yeah.
So this is because you have an unpredictable adversary on your vest, and someone who's been emboldened because he's made certain
friends, let's say.
Friends with the US, with Saudi Arabia. So you don't want him to launch a surprise attack or Pearl Harbor kind of an attack to try and take out your aircraft on the ground. So I mean, of course, the aircraft would be all dispersed.
Yeah.
They would be in their shelters and hardened shelters and their, blast-proof pens and, all of that. And certain number of aircraft in every forward airfield would be at a certain level of readiness, which would be much more than
like fueled up and missiles ready and stuff
fueled
like
up
that.
missile air defense roles primarily. And of course, your IACCS will be waiting and watching for any unusual activity. And it's not just the IACCS, every aspect of the military, which is meant to look across the border. And in this case, not just across the west, but also the north.
Yeah.
Is at a certain stage of alertness that is significantly higher than what it was just a year ago. So this is going to be the shape of things to come, I guess. Yeah. We have entered a NWNP scenario, right? No war, no peace.
Yeah.
So in this kind of a NWNP thing, it would be something like what it was, I would imagine, during the Cold War, starting from say the late 1940s, early 1950s, right up to 1991, where you had Western aircraft taking off within a few minutes and flying intercepts of Soviet aircraft, when they were, wherever they were, the Baltics or in the Pacific or, off the Sea of Japan or something like that. So fortunately, we've not had those kind of, close calls and all that. But I'm sure there will be a time when if this continues, you will probably see, Air Force jets taking off the minute a PAF thing goes up in the air as well, something like that.
Yeah.
That's already happening. So I can see that till the time there's no resolution to Op Sindoor, or, there's no, let's say a ceasefire isn't called, which both parties respect. And I think in this case, there are three parties. Till then, I think this level of alertness is going to remain.
Yeah.
Because I think we've learned from the last 5-6 years, with China on Ladakh 2020, and then with Pakistan during Op Sindoor. I think eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.
Yeah, right. I think we'll end the episode on that note. Thanks, Sandeep. Great chat as always. And to our listeners and viewers, we'll have a link to the report in the show description. It's, I think, a must read for people who are really interested in stuff like this. Especially because, like I said at the beginning of this episode, that this report sort of lays bare what we've been talking about on this podcast, of how aerial combat of present and the future is quite unlike what it was. And this combat between India, Pakistan is something I think that will be studied by experts and many countries and many air forces for years to come, for lessons that they may imbibe for their own potential battles that they may have to fight. So thanks, Sandeep. Great chat as always. Thanks so much.
As always, Dev. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thanks to our listeners and viewers. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and don't cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.